Hey there, YouTube. I'm Yukitsu. This is the Yukitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Sins of Solar Empire 2. So today we're going to be talking about the Jusotra Fabricator cruiser, which is a very strange support type cruiser that the Visari have access to. I don't know if you're going to see a ton of these in your typical gameplay, even though they're quite good. There is a reason for them not being necessarily that functional, but we'll get sort of into that here. So the Jusotra Fabricator Cruiser is something that is going to be very far away from fights and is probably going to be microed away from anything that could be hunting it. If things are really dedicated towards getting at these guys and they can't get away, then these things are pretty tough, but that doesn't really matter for what they are.
Spit
So
it out.
anyway, let's go over the stats here. So for durability, we're looking at 330. It's got 1,130 shield points, 915 armor points, 1,940 hull points, and it has no weaponry. For hidden statistics, you're looking at 48 armor strength and a maximum speed of 660. So let's look over its abilities here. Now, its support abilities are very strange in that nothing that it has actually has any way to swing a fight at all. It's got the mobile ship factory, but it produces so slowly that this isn't really going to swing a fight that's already in play. It can be used for light raiding, and it does make a little bit of a difference in that your reinforcements are a little bit closer to the battle, but it's not a tremendous in-combat boost. It lets you simply build frigates and corvettes in the location that you're at. This can be particularly useful if you suddenly need to get a little bit of point defense into a fight, but other than that, it's not really necessarily a huge deal to have access to this. The next one is retrofit. This is a very handy thing to have, but it's not necessarily going to let you do too much. Although if you really need to build a specific item on one of your capital ships, this is what you use. This lets you build your capital ship items much, much faster. And because of that, you could potentially do that in combat with some of your capital ships there. The Visari ship items, though, are pretty weak overall, so you're not going to typically see a humongous benefit to using this. Still, this is the closest it gets to an in-combat buff, and all it's really doing is letting you build stuff that you could have had prepared already a little bit faster. Some fringe cases where that really matters. Other cases, it's just really a convenience thing, where when you're trying to push into the enemy territory, you're rallying after a fight or whatever, it means you don't have to send your capital ships backwards to go to a place where they can retrofit. It lets you sort of keep that tempo going by retrofitting your ship on the field while you're in the fight. Next ability, this is debris reclamation. This is what I would actually say this ship is good for. It makes it so that every time you destroy an enemy ship, you gain 12% of the metal and 12% of crystal from that ship as salvage. This is upgradable up to 18% at a higher tech level 4. And it's a really strong ability to sort of get if you're able to keep your own Jusotra Fabricator alive for even a pretty small amount of time, and if your opponent is building higher tech ships. Funny enough, it's also very effective if you're fighting against Visari, since all of the ships are pure metal and crystal. They don't have a credit cost associated, because you get nothing for the credit cost of a ship there. So you're ideally hoping for things that are very expensive in terms of their metal and crystal cost, which means that anything that Visari produces is going to fit that category by default. So this does not stack. I've tried having multiple Jusotra Fabricators. It doesn't seem like it's giving me multiple ticks of it. I could be wrong based on the fact that it's kind of hard to tell with this thing going on, just because the income gets pretty fast by this point in the game. But as far as I can tell, you don't gain income faster by having multiple Jusotra Fabricators in the same location. You may still theoretically want more than one, though. You could have one with your fleet, so that's capable of gaining the resources from the debris reclamation. But you could also have another one that's sort of in the backline somewhere, trying to just drop raiding parties because it's able to sort of produce those while running away, and being a bit of a nuisance to your opponent that sort of scales up over time if they don't deal with it properly. Now, the reason that you're not going to see people producing these in a lot of situations is the cost. The Jusotra Fabricator Cruiser costs an Android, I believe is what they're called there, Andvar, which is one of your exotics. It's the yellow exotic, and it costs 24 supply. It's not listed here, but it also costs 300 metal and 360 crystal. It's kind of edging in towards the capital ship levels of cost there, and you could say that it's a third of the cost of a capital ship. It's not quite that, but it's really, really expensive, and early exotics, even into the mid-game, are quite hard to come by. Unless you're kind of lucky. So losing out on your exotics and losing out on the capital ship options that those produce for you is really quite painful. And that's why I would say that you're probably not necessarily going to want to get these unless you're going for a particular strategy that involves having access to this. I think it's an kind of really good support ship in certain situations as well, though. If you've got an opponent that's not going to be able to easily get to the Jusotras, not going to easily be able to hunt them down or whatever, if you've got a gravity well where they're able to hide at the back and you're able to sort of fight your opponent closer towards the center of the gravity well or closer to the other edge, that's going to work for well for these guys if your opponent's not using a lot of carriers, because bombers could strafe this thing down, and there's not a whole lot you could easily do about it other than run away with it. There's a lot of little things that could happen that make this thing like just sit there and not have to worry about any enemies getting at it. And in those cases, the Jusotra Fabricator Cruiser is going to rack up a lot of metal and a lot of crystal for you, which you're going to be able to recycle into more ships, which you can then sort of use to tempo your way into your opponent. If you're not in a situation where you can do that, what could happen is this thing gets easily sniped, and then you're down both an Anvar, which is really expensive, and you're down 300 metal, and you're down 360 crystal, which is a humongous investment. Now, it is a tough ship. It is a durable ship, but it's not so durable that you can go letting one getting sniped, even after you've absorbed a pretty decent amount of enemy ships, metal and crystal. You really have to have this thing stay alive for a good chunk of a fight through a pretty large grinding fight before it really, really pays for itself. Now, super late game when you're getting easy access to a lot of exotics because you're producing them yourself and you don't have to worry about them so much anymore, you could theoretically see yourself getting these more consistently and letting them get blown up, maybe even having some redundancies in that. If you have got a couple of these redundant, the fact that they're so tough and the fact you could sort of keep them alive does mean that, like, if your opponent's really trying to focus down all of your Jusotras, they're not eroding your combat capabilities at all by going after these. So if they've really decided to focus on the Jusotras, that's fine at that point in the game, because they'll take so long to kill compared to your other ships, and they're not, as they're getting killed, like, you're just as good at fighting as you were before they all died. So there's sort of some utility in that in the super late game, but generally speaking, these things are really, really in a spot where whether or not they work is going to be hugely situational, not consistent at all. Anyway, as far as upgrades go, like I said, this thing actually does have its own sort of unique upgrade path here. You do need to research mobile retrofit. You also need to get the research for the debris reclamation. It does not do that by default. In fact, at Tech 2, the Jusotra is basically useless. All it does is it becomes a really expensive, really slow ship bay. And as a result of that, I would actually skip this during Tech 2. I wouldn't even get this until I was in Tech 3, at which point it suddenly explodes into becoming fairly useful. Obviously, none of the weapon upgrades are going to matter for this thing because it doesn't produce anything as far as weapons go, but the ships that really benefit from it that it can produce are probably, for the most part, the pulse weapons and the missiles, but I still wouldn't think about this ship too highly when I'm thinking about the upgrades there. For survival, again, you don't want this to be anywhere near any kind of fights at all. If you're looking at getting into a big fight in an asteroid, I would almost consider just not sending this thing, because if you're in an asteroid, the distance from like one end of it to the other, let's see if I can find one in this particular one. Yeah, so like you jump into this one and you jump in here, your opponent's like jumped in there. You're in range basically of their ships, and you'd have to sort of run all the way up here while under fire. In that particular instance, like focusing down your Jusotra doesn't really cost them anything in terms of like having to dive through your ships and getting themselves into an awkward position to hunt this down. They can just hunt it down. By contrast, if you're in something like, say, this cold system, and you've jumped in over here and your opponent's over here, you could have this Jusotra all the way back here, and your opponent would have to fly their ships all the way through here while they're fighting your ships, getting damaged and taking losses. And you've got time to turn this thing around and actually jump it away in that instance if you want to. You can make it so that it's facing the other direction, ready to jump out of the system at a moment's notice. And in that case, your opponent's going to be taking a whole bunch of losses where they're not fighting effectively, they're not like targeting your ships, they're not effectively dealing damage, and you're able to get a big advantage on that instance when you're in this kind of distance. And there's some systems where it's like a star, and when you're in the star system, the distances from these can be extremely, extremely long. And even more so, if you've got certain types of stellar anomalies, you can actually make it so that you're moving even slower while you're in them. So those sort of sectors, the Jusotra is really, really powerful. By contrast, these smaller ones like barren worlds or like asteroids really do not help the Jusotra all that much there. So in other sort of things here, like, yeah, none of these should matter, but in the event that this thing does get attacked, you kind of want all of these. Like I said, you can kind of run away with this thing. In that case, if you do flee the scene, and it is expensive enough that you do want to preserve it, you can get back your health and have it come back in a little bit faster. If your opponent's not like super hard chasing, if they're going through like warping after you, then you're gonna have to do something else because it's quite slow as well. But in the event that they're not really desperate to kill it, then you can just sort of like regenerate it back and then send it back into the fight there. The atomic engineering is actually quite good for this though, because not only does it make it tougher, the Jusotra does does turn very slowly, like I said. So being able to turn it around so that it can warp out of the system faster. The max turn speed, max acceleration does help it quite a bit as far as that goes. The shield bonuses, again, ideally you don't have to use those, but they are quite good. The regeneration is a little bit less important. Shields regenerate quite quickly anyway, but it's still nice to have if you're sort of trying to keep this thing alive there. Now, your opponent might not actually try to kill it. It's a fairly tanky vessel, and it is kind of... It doesn't look very assuming. Like, in terms of whether or not you're going to win that one fight or not, it makes no difference. It's not going to be about winning that one fight. It's about winning future fights. So, opponents may underestimate its impact on an overall game, because you can ignore the Jusotra and win the fight that you're in. Like, it just does nothing as far as that fight is concerned. And then, like, after 3 or 4 fights where you've ignored it, you might find that you're sort of losing the game. So I do think it is actually a really high priority target, but people might not be targeting it because they don't think that it's going to make much of an impact, if that makes any sense there. So for other upgrades, though, again, we're not looking at really anything in the tech tree helping it out all that much in the civilian tech tree. Not for either the Alliance or the otherwise. You're not producing a lot of ships like with this, and it's usually going to be outside of its own culture, so it's not going to get the bonus. So I also don't think that benefits too much from phase stuff, although the duration does help a little bit in the event that you have to flee with it. As far as phase resonance upgrades go, the mobility can matter. If you hop into a system and you can see immediately within that sort of window that your opponent's diving through your army to try and get at it, then the mobility is going to help. You're going to like pop it in, everything's going to start fighting, and you're going to be like, oh, well, I need to get out of here. So you try to get out of there. The mobility lets you jump up faster because you're not charging quite as long. Gives you a head start when you're running away if they really want to go after it as well. So you can potentially get some planetary defenses or something like that. This does help this ship quite a bit there. For combat, it doesn't technically do anything for the ship really at all there. Utility, again, doesn't really do anything at all there. So this is not really a ship that benefits from those kinds of buffs, but it's not really supposed to. It's non-combatant. So, yeah, it's a very interesting ship. If it didn't cost an Andvar, it would be extremely overpowered. With the cost of the Andvar, I'm not too sure where I would place this personally. I still think that its ability is really, really strong. I think it's actually quite good if you're able to sort of position it well. It's just if you're not able to get that positioning, if your opponent really sort of sees this thing as like, okay, I'm not going to let it get what it wants out of this, then it's kind of useless. It'll get sniped out before it can really do anything. And it's very expensive to replace, so it's worth sniping out, even if you might lose a fight a little bit harder than you would like to. So, yeah, that's the Jusotra Fabricator Cruiser. Very interesting. It's got some like interesting hidden applications, but its exotics cost really spikes up how much it's worth. I don't necessarily think, though, that they should remove the Andvar cost. I do think that the exotic cost on this is warranted, given how strong it is. But it does make it a very fringe choice where you have to think about whether or not you want it in a given situation or not. And your opponent, if they know about it, can really play around it too. They don't really just have to let this thing start racking up a ton of money for the Visari player there. In any event, though, that's going to be our video for today. I hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.